You have seen this diagram. 4 circles. What you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, what you can be paid for. And in the sliver where all 4 overlap, one word: Ikigai. It is on 1,000,000 slides and 1,000,000 posts. It is the reason you know the word at all. Here is what nobody tells you. The book that made Ikigai famous runs 160 pages, and those 4 phrases are not in it. Not the circles, not the overlap. The words "what the world needs" do not appear anywhere in the book. The diagram everyone quotes survives in it as a single picture the author's own text never once mentions, credited on the copyright page to a man who is neither of them. So if the 4 circles are not the secret, what did 2 writers actually find in a village of 3,000 people on the far edge of Japan? Start with rain and a bar in Tokyo small enough to count the stools. 2 writers who had read each other's work but never met sit down together for the first time. Hector Garcia has been living in Japan for years. Francesc Miralles has come at the same questions from Barcelona. They talk until the place closes. A year later, they are walking through a park in the middle of the city, and the conversation turns to logotherapy, Viktor Frankl's idea that a human being's deepest need is not pleasure, but meaning. One of them remarks that the method has rather gone out of fashion. And then a word surfaces, a Japanese word neither of them can translate cleanly, that seems to hold the same idea Frankl spent his life on, except that in Japan, nobody treats it as therapy. They treat it as ordinary. The word is Ikigai. They go looking for the book about it. That is the natural next move. Someone must have written this down. Nobody has. They search, and they find a gap on the shelf where a book should be. Not a single volume brings this idea to the West. Not one that explains what the word means to the people who actually use it. Then they find the number that turns a curiosity into a trip. On Okinawa, they read, there are 24.55 people over the age of 100 for every 100,000 residents. And on Okinawa, there is a village in the north called Ogimi, 3,000 people, that has been given a name, the Village of Longevity. So they do the only thing 2 writers can do with a gap on a shelf and a village with a nickname. They buy tickets. Before they go, they build a theory. Everybody does this. You hear that a village lives forever, and your mind reaches for the substance, the thing you could buy. Theirs was fruit and tea. Ogimi grows a small green citrus called shikuwasa, sharp and sour, and drinks an infusion of moringa. Perhaps that is it. Perhaps longevity is an ingredient. Perhaps the secret is something in the soil that you could bottle and ship and put on a shelf, and the whole mystery reduces to chemistry. Hold on to that theory. It is a good one. It is the kind of answer the world is built to give you, and it is the reason you have seen 4 circles on a slide. The village is going to take that theory away from them, in a single sentence, from a woman in an apron who is 88 years old and still driving herself to lunch. But not yet. They arrive with 2 cameras. Ogimi sits under the Yanbaru jungle, green folding over green, and the first thing that fails to happen is solemnity. Nobody is meditating on a rock. The residents are laughing. The place is dense with hills and gardens and small houses, and the locals talk about the Bonagaya, sprites with red hair who live in the trees and, they say, are fond of mischief. The authors came looking for a discipline, a regimen, a rule, something you could follow. What they walk into is a mood, and it does not fit. Because of every place on earth this could have been, this village of laughing 100-year-olds sits on the one island in Japan that the 20th century hurt the most. Okinawa, at the end of the Second World War, lost 200,000 lives. That is the whole of what the book says about it. One number, no images. And the point of the number is not the horror. The point is what these islanders did with it. Because the principle they live by is called Ikariba Chode, it means, roughly, treat everyone as a sibling, even if you have only met them once, not despite the outsiders, toward them. And under that sits another word, Yui Maru, the habit of a neighborhood that carries its own. You help with the harvest, you help with the roof. Nobody keeps a ledger, because everybody is on it. The authors came for a diet and found a village that had every reason to close, and did the opposite. At the heart of the joy, they decide, is their Ikigai. Now they have to find out what that means. So what does it mean? Here is the honest answer, and it is smaller than you want. The book's own first translation of Ikigai, the very first gloss it offers, is not reason for being. It is the happiness of always being busy. Later, it hedges toward the phrase you know. Everyone has an Ikigai, what a French philosopher might call a raison d'être. Might. And the closest the book comes to a definition it will stand behind is this. According to those born on Okinawa, our Ikigai is the reason we get up in the morning. The word itself is two pieces. Iki, life. Gai, worth, value. Life and what makes it worth the trouble. That is the whole of it. No circles, no market analysis. Which raises a question about that picture. Let us settle it. Search the book for the word Venn. 0. Intersection. 0. Overlap. 0. 4 circles. 0. The phrase, what the world needs. The sentence at the top of every version of that diagram does not occur in the book. Neither does what you can be paid for. The word paid is not in it. The word diagram appears exactly once in 160 pages. It is on the copyright page, in the small print where publishers credit illustrators, and it reads, illustration based on a diagram by Mark Wynn. That is the entire trace, a single picture, credited to an outsider on a page of legal text, and the author's own prose never refers to it, never explains it, never names one of the 4 circles, never says Ikigai is found where anything meets anything. The most famous idea in this book is a picture the book never makes an argument for. And the argument it does make points the other way. Because if Ikigai were the intersection of your talent and your passion and the world's need and your salary, then the first advice in the book would be a worksheet. It is not. The first advice in the book is, whatever you do, don't retire. There is, in fact, no word in Japanese for retiring in the English sense, leaving the workforce for good. The concept has no name because the thing has no appeal. Dan Buettner, a National Geographic reporter the book quotes, put it plainly, the idea of stopping simply does not exist there in the way it exists here. Notice what that does to the diagram. 4 circles describe a destination. You find the spot, you arrive, you are done. An Okinawan would not understand the sentence. There is no spot. There is only the not stopping. The book's evidence for this comes from the blue zones, 5 regions where people live measurably longer than anyone else. Okinawa, Sardinia, Loma Linda in California, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Icaria in Greece. 3 of the 5 are islands. A word of care here. That framing has been challenged since this book was written. Some researchers now argue those clusters track poor birth records more than long life. The book states it as settled. It is not. But strip out the geography and what the studies reported still matters. 4 things kept recurring: diet, exercise, strong social ties, and finding a purpose in life, an Ikigai. One of those 4 is not like the others. 3 are things you do to your body. The 4th is a reason to have a body at all. Take the diet, because it is the most famous, and because of how the book treats it. There is a saying repeated on Okinawa before or after a meal, hara hachibo. Fill your belly to 80%. Not full. 80. You stop while there is still room and finish a meal slightly hungry. And then the authors do something you almost never see in a book like this. They immediately concede the problem. There is, they write, no way to know objectively if your stomach is at 80% capacity. Sit with that. The most quotable rule in the book comes with the author's own admission that the number is unmeasurable. It is a feel, dressed as a figure. Which is the first hint of a pattern here, one that will matter a great deal by the end. The moment this book is most useful is usually the moment it is least precise. Then there is the part of Okinawan life you cannot put on a plate. A moai is a small group of friends, and not the way you mean it. Members pay dues, the money is pooled, and each month one person in the group takes the surplus. If someone falls into trouble, they can draw on the fund early. So it is a savings club and a social club and, quietly, an insurance policy against being alone. People are placed in a moai as children. Some of them stay in the same one for 90 years. Which means that on Okinawa, the answer to who will look after me when everything goes wrong was decided before you could walk and never came up again. Ask yourself how much of your energy goes to a question these people were simply never asked. Now the book turns to the thing everybody actually wants, not dying. It opens with a parable that is better than the science around it. Imagine a rabbit, and imagine you know exactly when the rabbit will die. Now the rabbit begins to age 1 year for every year that passes. Ordinary, predictable. The parable's point is that aging is not a mystery, it is a rate. And a rate is the kind of thing that can, in principle, change. The authors then walk through the optimists, the researchers who believe we are approaching an escape velocity, where medicine adds years faster than years pass, and they are careful to add that other scientists are far less optimistic. Keep hold of that carefulness. You're going to need it in a minute because it is about to go missing. The claim they build on is that stress ages you, not in a poetic sense, in a cellular one. The study the book leans on looked at 39 women caring for chronically ill children and reported that the stress had shortened their telomeres, the caps on the ends of our chromosomes that fray as we age. 39. The book gives you that number itself, and it is worth saying plainly, that is a small study, and this kind of telomere finding has proved hard to reproduce since. The direction may well be right. The certainty is not earned. But the book's practical advice survives the doubt because it never depended on the biology. Notice your routine. Find the habits that are grinding you down and swap them for better ones. You did not need a chromosome to tell you that. So the book goes and finds the oldest people on Earth, and there are startlingly few. Between 300 and 400 are alive at any time, and of those only about 75 have an age anyone can verify. Then it asks them the question. The answers are magnificently unhelpful. Misao Okawa, 117, asked how she looked after herself, eating sushi and sleeping. Asked the secret of her longevity. I ask myself the same thing. Jean Calment, 122, the longest verified life on record, though that record has been questioned since. She quit smoking at 120 because of her cataracts. On her 120th birthday, she said, I see badly, I hear badly, and I feel bad, but everything's fine. Walter Bruning, 114, we're all going to die. Never be afraid to die, because you're born to die. Not one of them is selling anything. There are two more anti-aging claims here, and they sit at opposite ends of the quality scale. One study the book cites, without telling you where it came from, found that the longest-lived people share two dispositional traits. Take that for exactly what it is, a claim with no address. And then there is Alexander Imich, who at 111 was the oldest man alive. Asked for his secret, asked whether it was the genes or the life. He did not reach for a theory. He said, I don't know. I just haven't died yet. That is not a study. It cannot be replicated, funded, or peer-reviewed. It is also, so far, the most honest sentence in this book, and the authors are about to hear 100 more like it. Before they get there, a woman about to turn 100 sings for them. Not a performance, not a ceremony. The authors are sitting in Ogimi, and this woman, days from her 100th birthday, sings them a song, and the moment lands harder than any of the data around it. Because here's what you notice. Watching a person do that at 99, she is not preserving herself. She is not managing a condition. She is not, in any sense you would recognize, being careful. She is busy, occupied, mid-sentence in her own life. The happiness of always being busy. That was the book's first translation of Ikigai, remember, and it sounded thin when you heard it. It does not sound thin coming from her. But to understand why being busy is not the same as being distracted, the authors have to go back 60 years to a doctor in Vienna. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist, and he thought his profession had made a mistake. Psychoanalysis put you on a couch where you lay back and said whatever came to mind, In logotherapy, Frankl said, the patient sits up straight and has to listen to things that are on occasion hard to hear. And he opened with a question so blunt, it still stops people cold. He asked his patients why they did not take their own lives. It sounds cruel. It was the opposite, because usually the patient found good reasons not to, and the reasons they found were the treatment. Naming what you cannot leave behind is how you get told what you're for. Frankl's whole method rests on one inversion. You do not invent the meaning of your life. You discover it. It was already there, waiting to be noticed. He earned the right to say it in the worst place on earth. Frankl was taken to Auschwitz. He had a manuscript with him, his life's work, and it was confiscated and destroyed. So he rewrote it on scraps of paper he scavenged through typhus in a concentration camp on the theory that a man with a book to finish has something the camp cannot take. What he wrote afterward is the line everyone knows, and it deserves to be quoted exactly. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And in that same work, he reached for Nietzsche, who had said it first and shorter. He who has a why to live for can bear with almost anyhow. A why, not a diagram of one. A why. Which brings us to the disease Frankl thought his century had. He called one form of it the Sunday neurosis. All week the schedule holds you upright. Then the week stops. The noise drops away. And in the silence, you feel the void. The sense that nothing you are doing particularly matters. Frankl's radical move was to say that this feeling is not the illness. It is the diagnosis working. Existential frustration, he argued, is a catalyst, not a defect. The emptiness is your life, asking a question you have been too busy to answer. Above all, he wrote, a man has to find his purpose, his reason for getting out of bed. There it is again, the exact phrase the Okinawans used, arrived at from a completely different direction by a man who had every reason to conclude the opposite. He proved it in the clinic, one person at a time. An American diplomat comes to him, unhappy in his work, wanting to talk about his childhood, expecting years of it. Frankl declines. The man does not have a neurosis. He has a job he should leave. He leaves it. A doctor comes to him, unable to climb out of the depression that followed his wife's death. Frankl does not console him. He asks a question. What would have happened if you had died first? The doctor says the obvious. She would have suffered terribly. And Frankl gives him the sentence, you have spared her all that suffering. Nothing about the man's life changed. His wife was still gone. But the grief had a job now, and a grief with a job can be carried. That is the whole method. Not comfort, reframing, until the pain is load-bearing. Japan reached similar ground by a different road, and one of its roads was a psychiatrist named Shoma Morita. Morita's therapy begins by refusing the Western instinct. Do not fight the feeling. Do not argue it down. In feelings, he said, it is best to be wealthy and generous. Let them all in. His image for the alternative is a donkey tied to a post. The animal panics, walks in circles trying to escape, and winds the rope tighter with every lap until it is bound to the post by its own effort. That, he thought, is what we do to ourselves. So instead you greet it. The line the book gives, borrowed from Thich Nhat Hanh, hello solitude, how are you today? Come, sit with me, and I will care for you. You do not defeat the feeling. You give it a chair, and then you get on with what you were doing. There is a companion practice called Niken, built out of 3 questions, and they are not the questions you would choose. What have I received from this person? What have I given to this person? What problems have I caused this person? Notice what is missing. There is no 4th question about what they did to you. The whole architecture is designed to make that question unavailable. And the culture has a rule of thumb in the same key. If you are angry and want to fight, think about it for 3 days. Not, don't fight. Wait 3 days, because on the 3rd day, it is nearly always smaller. Frankl asks what your life is for. Morita asks you to stop wrestling your own feelings. Nikon asks, who has carried you? And every one of them is trying to deliver you to the same place, the state where you disappear into what you are doing. That state has a name and a scientist. Csikszentmihalyi called it flow, the state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. The experience itself is so enjoyable that people will do it even at great cost, for the sheer sake of doing it. A chess player knows it. So does a surgeon and a mathematician, and anyone who has ever looked up and found that 4 hours are gone. Small aside, and it is a good one. The book opens this chapter with a line it credits to Aristotle: "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Aristotle never wrote it. It is Will Durant, in 1926, summarizing him. Even a book about doing things properly quotes the internet's favorite line slightly wrong: "Nobody is immune, least of all us." So how do you get there? The book borrows 7 conditions for flow, and here the credit matters, because almost everyone gets it wrong. They are not Csikszentmihalyi's. They belong to Owen Schaefer of DePaul University, and the book says so plainly. The rule underneath them is a balance. Give yourself a task far below your skill, and you will be bored. You will abandon a book on quantum mechanics in 4 minutes, not because it is hard, but because you are not in it. Give yourself one far beyond your skill, and you will quit for the opposite reason. The target is the narrow band between hard enough to demand you, possible enough to hold you. Which means flow is not a personality, it is a setting, and it can be adjusted. It can also be destroyed, and we are extremely good at destroying it. Here is how we destroy it. There was an experiment at Stanford run by Clifford Nass, and the book tells it as a story. Arrows on a screen, some red, some blue. The task is simple. Watch the red ones, ignore the blue ones. The people who were confident multitaskers, who ran several streams at once as a matter of pride, did worse. Not slightly. They could not filter. The blue arrows got in. The finding is that the skill you think you are building is the skill you are losing. Attention is not a tap that splits. It is a single beam, and every extra target dims it. The book's prescription is almost insultingly simple. Do one thing. Turn the rest off. Not for your productivity, for the 4 hours you will otherwise never notice yourself living. So who is actually good at this? The authors went and looked. In a town called Kumano, near Hiroshima, there's a factory that makes brushes. The authors watch a woman work. She is wearing a mask because breath would move the bristles. Every single bristle in every brush passes through her hands. She has done this for decades. There is no version of this job that is quick, and no version that can be automated without becoming a different job. Japan has a word for what she is: takumi, an artisan. Someone whose skill has gone past technique into something closer to identity. And here's the thing the authors cannot get past. She is not enduring it. She is not counting down. Watch her hands for 10 seconds and the 4 circles collapse. Nobody drew a diagram to find this. She just never stopped. 2 more, and then you will see the shape. Steve Jobs went to Toyama and found the porcelain of Yukio Shikunaga. He came back 3 times in 1 week. Jobs, at the height of everything, returning to a small studio to look again at a man's clay. He was not sourcing a product. He recognized something. And in a subway station in Tokyo, an old man makes sushi. He is arguably the best in the world. His apprentice spent years, being taught to make the tamago, a single sweet egg omelet, and failing and making it again, until one day the master said, "Now it is good." The apprentice went outside and cried. We would call that a waste of a life. The book calls it the thing itself. Neither man was searching for his purpose. Both had simply refused to be finished with it. Which brings us to the refusal in its purest form. Hayao Miyazaki, the animator, retired. Everyone reported it. He was done. And the day after his retirement took effect, he was at his desk, drawing. On the 30th of December, because Miyazaki's problem was never his career. It was that drawing is what his hands do, and a press release cannot switch that off. And centuries earlier, Hokusai, the great printmaker, wrote a postscript to his own work, an old man already, saying that if he were granted more time, at 110 every line he drew would be instinct with life. 110. He was not joking. He was negotiating. That is what a culture with no word for retirement produces. Not workaholics. People for whom stopping was never one of the options on the table. But you are not a sushi master, and this is where most books lose the thread. So the book goes small. It calls it microflow. There is an elevator operator in Shinjuku whose whole job is a button, and who is, by every account, completely absorbed in it. Bill Gates washes the dishes. Every night, he has, one imagines, options. He says he enjoys it. Richard Feynman, one of the great physicists of the century, would paint walls. None of these is a calling. Not one of them would survive contact with a four-circle diagram. Nobody is paying Gates for the dishes, and the world does not need Feynman's paint. That is exactly the point. If your Ikigai has to be optimized, then a man at a sink for 10 minutes has nothing, and he plainly has something. And so the book arrives at its quiet heresy: rituals over goals. A goal is a place you are not yet. It lives in the future, and it makes the present into a corridor you walk down to reach it. A ritual has no future in it at all. It is just the thing, done, today, again, tomorrow. The line the authors land on is this: the happiest people are not the ones who achieve the most. They are the ones who spend more time than others in a state of flow. Read that twice, because it quietly demolishes the entire self-improvement shelf it is sitting on. Not the ones who achieve, the ones who are absorbed. Which is a lovely theory in a Tokyo park. Now the authors have to take it to Ogimi and say it out loud to people who have been doing it for 100 years. 3 hours to Naha, then 2 more on the road north, and the tarmac gives out. They meet a man named Taira, who runs things. And Taira produces the object that tells you everything about this place: a binder. In it, every single resident of Ogimi, organized by age and by moai. Not by household, not by income, by age and by which small group of friends is holding them. That binder is the local government's operating system. Somebody has written down, on paper, who each of these 3,000 people belongs to. 17 neighborhoods, and each one has someone whose job is longevity. The authors flew in looking for a fruit. What they are being handed in a plastic binder is a village that has decided nobody gets to fall through. And then Yuki takes the theory apart. She is 88. She is driving. Her co-pilot is 99. They're all going to lunch. The authors ask her the question they flew 9,000 kilometers to ask: the shikuwasa, the moringa, the diet, the fruit, the tea. What is it? What are you eating? Yuki lifts a bite of the little dessert that came after the meal and says, "Food won't help you live longer." And then, the secret is smiling and having a good time. That is the whole book, delivered by an 88-year-old with a mouthful of cake to 2 men who crossed the planet to hear about citrus. The hypothesis they carried onto the plane is dead. The village killed it in 1 sentence. And whatever the answer is, it is not on a shelf, and it cannot be shipped. Once you stop looking for the substance, you start seeing what is actually in front of you. A birthday party, 99, 94, and a young man of 89, with a shikuwasa cake. A game of gate ball, which the authors play and lose, to a woman who had recently turned 104. Sit with that for 1 second. 2 healthy men in their 30s and 40s, beaten at a lawn game by someone born before the First World War, who then presumably went home and got on with her day. Nobody in these scenes is doing longevity. There is no protocol. There's a party, and a game, and a cake, and a 104-year-old with a mallet. The authors have stopped taking notes on the diet. There is a spiritual layer here, and it is not the one the West imports. Okinawa has its own tradition, older than the Buddhism that arrived later. Sacred groves called utaki, village priestesses, the yuta, and in the home, a butsuden, the altar where the family's dead are not gone exactly. You talk to them. You tell them things. They have a word, mabui, for the spirit inside a person, and the striking part is that mabui can transfer. It can be carried in an object. A ring a grandmother wore is not a memento of her. It has some of her in it. Then the authors are taken to drink longevity water, which turns out to be in a parking lot. Nobody thinks this is a contradiction. The sacred here is not somewhere else. It is where you already are, and it is on the way to the shops. So they stop theorizing and do the work. 100 interviews in one village with people who have outlived nearly everyone. 5 things came back over and over. Here is the first, and it arrived so consistently the authors could not ignore it. Don't worry. That is it. Not manage your stress. Not optimize your cortisol. Don't worry, said by people who lived through the worst battle of the Pacific War and rebuilt on top of it. And the way they say it is the tell. There is no technique attached. Nobody in Ogimi has an app. Worry, to them, appears to be a thing you can simply decline, the way you decline a second helping. They are not the first people to say it. They may be the first people you have met who obviously mean it. The second theme is habits, and the details are better than any framework. They get up early. One man's alarm goes at 4. They tend their gardens before the day is warm, the tomatoes, the vegetables, the weeds. And one of them tells the authors something that ought to be printed on the wall of every nursing home on earth. The key to staying sharp in old age is in your fingers. From your fingers to your brain and back again. If you keep your fingers busy, you'll live to see 100. There is no study attached to that. It is one old person's theory of their own body. But look at what it has in common with the brush maker, the sushi master, and Feynman's paintbrush. The hands are busy, so the person is somewhere. That is not a health regimen. It is an address. Themes 3, 4, and 5 arrive together, because in Ogimi, they are the same thing. Nurture your friendships every day, and the man who says it is not being sentimental. He is on his feet from 7:20 to 8:15 every morning, doing his rounds, because friendship there is a schedule, not a feeling. Live and unhurried life. A man who makes things out of wicker describes his day, and the day has almost nothing in it. He makes wicker. That is the day. And be optimistic, which produced the sentence that ends the search. Asked for the secret, the actual secret, the thing they had flown across the world for. One of the villagers said, "There's no secret to it. The trick is just to live." The trick is just to live. The most anticlimactic answer imaginable, from the one group of people on Earth qualified to give it. And then the authors count what they have. Every single person they interviewed keeps a vegetable garden. 100%. Every one of them also had a second occupation, not a job, a something else they do. And this line, which is the whole book in a sentence, they did not see a single old grandpa sitting on a bench doing nothing. Not one. In a village of 3,000 people, weighted heavily toward the very old, there was no bench with a stopped person on it. Now go back and ask the diagram what it would do here. What you can be paid for. Nobody is paying for the wicker. What the world needs, the world has not requested these tomatoes. The circles cannot see this village at all, and this village is the evidence. Now, the diet, because it is real and it deserves a fair hearing. The numbers on the page are specific. Okinawans eat around 206 different foods across the year, roughly 18 in a day. Their salt runs about 7 grams against the rest of Japan's 12. Their daily calories come in near 1,785, against a Japanese average over 2,000. Fish a few times a week. Vegetables at every meal. Little plates, so a meal looks like abundance and weighs almost nothing. And the shikawasa, the fruit they had pinned their hopes on, really is unusual. It carries around 40 times the nobiletin of an orange, which is genuinely interesting and is not a medicine. The book goes further than that and says it has been proven to prevent serious disease. It has not. That is a rodent study wearing a lab coat. The plates are good. The claim is oversold. Same with the movement. And here the book gets something right that the fitness industry has spent 40 years getting wrong. The Blue Zone's finding was not that these people exercise. It is that the ones who live longest are not the ones who do the most exercise, but the ones who move the most. Nobody in Ogimi is training. They are weeding before breakfast, walking because the shop is there, kneeling in a garden and getting up again 30 times without ever calling it a set. There is even a national radio broadcast, Radio Taiso, a few minutes of simple movements done to a voice on the radio, and about a third of Japanese people do it. In one nursing home, They do it from their wheelchairs. The exercise you will actually do for 90 years is the exercise that never announced itself as exercise. Now the honest part, and this book has earned the right to have it said carefully. Much of the science in here is soft, and you should know where. The Blue Zone's framing is contested. The telomere study was 39 people. The chapter on eating less to live longer makes a large promise, and then, to the author's credit, concedes that whether calorie restriction will extend lifespan in humans is not yet known. The antioxidant chapter rests on a theory of aging the field has largely moved past, and the graph that proves Okinawa's advantage is built on data from 1966, 2004, and 2005, printed in a book from 2016. Here's what is remarkable. The authors keep telling you, you cannot measure 80%. Other scientists are less optimistic. It is not yet known. The hedges are all there, in their own handwriting. It is the internet that removed them, and then drew a diagram. So, strip out the studies. What is left standing? What is left is a proverb. Nana korobi yaoki. Fall 7 times, rise 8. And a philosophical tradition that the book notices arrived at the same conclusion twice on opposite sides of the world. Buddha walked out of a palace. Zeno of Citium walked away from the Cynics and founded the Stoa. Both concluded that wanting less is the shortest route to needing less. Seneca, one of the richest men in Rome, used to spend a week living as though he had nothing, not as penance, as a rehearsal so that poverty could never surprise him. And Epictetus, who had been enslaved, left the sentence the whole tradition rests on. It is not what happens to you, it is how you react to it. Which is, word for word, what Frankl worked out in a camp 2,000 years later. Then Japan adds the piece the Stoics never quite had, a word for loving the thing precisely because it will not last. Wabi-sabi, the beauty of the imperfect and the passing. A teacup with a crack in it is not a damaged teacup. The crack is where the beauty is, because the crack is the proof that it is real and that it is going. And its twin, Ichigo Ichii, which this book translates as, this moment exists only now and won't come again. The most beautiful expression of it is a building. The Grand Shrine of Ise has stood for centuries, and every 20 years, they tear it down and build it again. The materials are always new. The shrine is always the same. It has survived not by lasting, but by being remade. Marcus Aurelius saw it too. The things we love are leaves on a tree, and we should love them as leaves, which sets up the last idea and the toughest. Nassim Taleb's word is anti-fragility, and the book quotes him. Anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same. The anti-fragile gets better. Hercules cuts off the Hydra's head and 2 grow back. The Hydra is not tough. It is improved by being attacked. In 2011, the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami hit Japan. Some towns became ghost towns. Ishinomaki rebuilt. Fukushima did not. So how do you become the one that rebuilds? The book's answer is unglamorous. Have more than one thing. Every senior they interviewed in Ogimi had a second occupation, so not one of them had a single point of failure. And then Taleb's move. Name the goals you would be relieved to lose. Good riddance goals. Then lose them. The Japanese poet Mitsuo Aida wrote 2 characters that the authors leave you with. I'm a Coco. Here, now. And their conclusion is a sentence they nearly bury, which is the sentence this whole video has been walking toward. Life is not a problem to be solved. Because that is what the 4 circles are. The circles are a solution. And a solution needs a problem. And the problem they invented is that your life is currently wrong and could be optimized into rightness. The author's own last word is the opposite. There is no perfect strategy, they write, for connecting with our Ikigai. What the Okinawans taught them is that we should not worry too much about finding it. That is the actual advice of the actual book. From the woman with her wicker, the man with his tomatoes, the 88-year-old driving her 99-year-old friend to lunch. None of them was looking. Every one of them had it. So keep the small things. That is the whole inheritance. Something that keeps you busy doing what you love, the authors write, while being surrounded by the people who love you. That is it. That is the finding, after the flights and the interviews and the binder and the cake. And their final rule, Rule 10, the last thing in the book, does not point out a diagram. It points back at the man in the camp. There is a passion inside you, they write, a unique talent. And if you don't know what your Ikigai is yet, then as Viktor Frankl says, your mission is to discover it. Not construct it, not calculate it. Discover it, because it is already in there, wearing an apron, holding a mallet, driving to lunch. Nobody in Ogimi ever found their Ikigai. They just never put it down.